What's cracking, Seattle hockey fans? I hope you enjoyed the holiday weekend. It certainly was eventful, and we'll talk about some of that as it relates to hockey in general, and of course, the Seattle Kraken, who are wrapping up development camp with a scrimmage that will be live streamed. We'll get into that and more on today's episode of Locked on Kraken.
You are Locked on Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Kraken, where we bring you your team every single day as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Erica L. Ayala, been with you here since the beginning. And I told you that I have a bit of news, our friends over on Too Many Men podcast might say. And that is that I will be a CBS contributor. It will start with women's basketball. So, of course, including the Seattle Storm, take us through women's college basketball, but also I will be an NHL contributor over on CBS. So more to come there. All of that to say, I am so excited to be back here with you on Locked on Kraken. And today's episode of Locked on Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more about that as the show goes on. But you can see over here on our rundown, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on audio, no worries. I'm going to walk you through. But on today's show, we're going to talk about the NHL draft recap. For our everydayers, you know that I took some time away. I was with family that was visiting me in Tulsa. Then we'll talk about who's in, who's out. That's really our free agency segment. And then we'll talk about development camp and get you ready for today's scrimmage. All right, folks, like I said, it's been a busy time. The Seattle Kraken have gotten a lot done, and we're going to walk you through our 10 draft picks in 2023. Now, if you are an everydayer, you know that on Thursday of last week, you got to know a little bit more about Edward Ayala. That was our pick at 20 in the first round. And, I'm pretty excited for Edward because, first of all, he's from Team Czechia. Those who follow my women's hockey coverage, you know I am a big fan of what is happening with the Czech national teams, but a little bit more about Ayala. He is, again, a native of Czechia. He's played with Team Czechia for the U18s and U20 clubs, plays for HC Kometa Brno in the top pro league in his home country, projected as a top 10 pick, but scouts overlooked him in some ways, and we've talked about that a little bit. What Seattle likes about him is that he is a threat to score as much as to set up his teammates, high hockey IQ, really good on forechecking and back checking, and his skating highly ranked compared to other first rounders. Again, it's pronounced Shala. So top 5 prospect in terms of pure scoring and playmaking skills. And so this is what the Seattle Kraken wrote in their draft blog. Shala sizes up as the ideal pick for Seattle, who has a significantly high upside. And we talked about this again earlier, or I should say last week a little bit. So again, we had 10 overall picks in the first round. The next pick for the Seattle Kraken, Carson Rykopf. Now, he played for the Kitchener Rangers in the OHL. He's a forward coming in at 6'1" and 194 pounds. And so he was the first pick in round 2 for the Seattle Kraken. Here's what the Kraken like about him. He scored 30 goals and 29 assists for 68 overall points in the OHL, again, with the Kitchener Rangers. Quote, seeing how fast they've turned to contenders, plus the staff they've got there and the kind of player they have, I think it's a special place and a really cool city, and I'm really excited about it. Now that's Carson talking about the Seattle Kraken. And so I think, what we're getting here is a player who at 50 at forward is going to be someone that is going to be physical in all zones. He has an elite shot per the scouts and has a net front presence, which I like. Moving on to our 57th pick in the second round. From the Tri-City Americans, the Seattle Kraken went with Lucas Dragicevic. I'm going to have to practice that one. So Dragicevic, I believe is how you say it. And so we're getting a defender, our first defender. I really have wanted the Seattle Kraken to focus on the blue line. He is touted as an offensive-minded player. He switched from forward to the blue line, so that's why he has a knack for the net. 15 goals and 60 assists in 68 regular season games last season. So there's a connection. So his Tri-City coach, Stu Barnes, used to be a scout with the Kraken, and so there's a direct connect there. So I went out of order here, so I apologize. But so we actually picked Oscar Fisker Molgaard before Dragicevic at the 52nd pick. So that was a forward from the SDL, 6 foot 166 pounds. And he played junior hockey in Sweden, but has also been a part of the Danish hockey community. Alexander True coming from there. And that's exactly what he said. He's excited to meet True and Oliver Bjorkstrand. So, Molgaard is another good pick here for the Seattle Kraken. And then I mentioned at 57, they pick Lucas Dragicevic. So I went a little bit out of order there, but you get the gist. In the third round, it was another defenseman, and that is Caden Price. Caden Price played in the WHL. See, he's 185 pounds, 6 foot even. And a little bit about Caden Price is he's considered a puck mover more than a scorer. Had 5 goals, 35 assists with in the Western Hockey League last season. And he also had 5 assists with the U18 Team Canada squad in international play. Price said, playing with the U18 team put me in position to fill different roles when he went back to the WHL. It's good to understand the ways I can help the team. Already like that, he's thinking of how he can fit into the different roles that might be afforded to him. Now we go back to the forward side of things with some center depth, and that is in the form of Andre Loshko, who played with the QMJHL. And a little bit about this centerman. He is considered a very skilled skater with a high hockey IQ. He goes to the Seattle Kraken in the 4th round at pick 116. In the 5th round, pick 148, the Seattle Kraken get a little local here. Another defender, WHL, and that is Caden Hamill. Everett Silvertips, 6'1", 173. See, in the 6th round, the Seattle Kraken, they go with another forward, Swedish connection here with Zeb Forfshall, Sweden Junior League, 5'9", 167. And then first goalie off the board for the Seattle Kraken comes also in the 6th round, Vesa Vedenpa from Finland, 6'2", 170 pounds. And then closing it out with Zachariah Wisdom from the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders in the USHL, also represents Team More Melanin. So I want to shout out Converge Media, who spoke to Wisdom, as well as some of the other Black coaches, and of course, Everett Fitzhugh. So go check that out. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more. So that is the quick rundown of the draft recap. And again, we'll talk about some of these players a little bit more throughout the week. You'll hear from some of them, and we'll get you ready for development camp. So coming up next on Locked On Kraken, let's talk about free agency, who's in, who's out, and then we'll get you out of here in time for development camp. There will be a live stream later today, this morning. I believe that's 9 a.m. Pacific time, and you can see some of the players in action. But right now, as I mentioned earlier on the show, this episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is the official sportsbook here of Locked On Kraken, and we want you to know that it is Major League Baseball season. And of course, Seattle fans, you know that because you are getting ready to host the All-Star Weekend. So take a swing at betting on MLB on FanDuel, and you'll get 10 times your first bet in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today by visiting FanDuel.com/locked-on, and that is how you will get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on Kraken, or /locked-on. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily routine. Now we went through the draft picks. Now we have to do a little bit of business. That's not my favorite. It is free agency. We knew that the Seattle Kraken would have an active free agency. Now I'm not going to play what Ron Francis said, but if you head over to our YouTube page, you can hear Ron Francis talking about free agency and the development camp. I'll mention what he said in the about the dev camp a little bit later, but here's what we know about the Seattle Kraken with regard to free agency. Now, first, we got Joey Daccord signed a 2-year contract, $1.2 million AAV. And what we heard from Ronnie Francis is that they've got 3 guys. That includes, of course, Chris Drieger and Philip Grubauer, who will come into camp, be competitive. And then that means that someone is going to have to go through waivers and see if they will spend their time in Coachella Valley. We heard from Dave Haxtell and, of course, Ron Francis, who you'll see if you're watching on YouTube on the screen. Again, not going to play this audio, but you can head over to our YouTube page to listen to that. Really likes Joey Daccord, what he's been able to do, felt he earned that contract and he earned the opportunity to make a strong case for a spot, for that second spot, presumably behind Philip Grubauer. All right, moving on. The Seattle Kraken. Now, there's a decent amount of 2-way contracts. Defenseman Jimmy Schultz, 1-year 2-way contract. That's $775 AAV. And, he played with the Coachella Valley Firebirds, who obviously had that great run and fell ultimately to the Hershey Bears in Game 7. So Jimmy signed up there. Next, we have Marian Studnik. Now, this is a forward played with the Dallas Stars. This is a 1-year, 2-way contract, also 775 AAV. So then we have John Hayden, also 775 AAV, 1-year, 2-way contract. Hayden, we saw a little bit with the Seattle Kraken, dealt with some injury, but was able to play with the Coachella Valley Firebirds towards the end in the postseason. Next, we have, and this is a big one and impacts some of what we saw as far as the players that are out. But Brian Dumoulin comes from the Pittsburgh Penguins, a 2-year contract with a with a 3.15 AAV. Of this defenseman, Ron Francis and Dave Haxtell in particular said that there's not too much that the Seattle Kraken will see next season that Brian has not already been through. So that's that veteran leadership that they really like to see. And of course, in the Pacific Northwest, the big signing that everyone liked, Kailer Yamamoto, 1-year contract, 1.5 AAV, comes over from the Edmonton Oilers. He's a Spokane native. And, there are a lot of things that Dave Haxtell in particular had to say about Yamamoto. So I think these are all pretty solid moves. They're not necessarily big moves. Obviously, lots of conversation on whether Erik Karlsson would make his way to the Seattle Kraken. Does not look like the Seattle Kraken are still in the sweepstakes, but they did agree to terms with Connor Carrick. Yes, we did the Slim Shady Guess Who's Back over here, because if you remember, we had a conversation and a sit down with Connor during that first and inaugural training camp. So go check that out over on our YouTube page. This is a 1-year, 2-way contract, 775 AAV. Defenseman, really has a lot of experience, spent the time last season with the Boston organization, now comes back to the Seattle Kraken. And I like this move for the Kraken. Do think Connor Carrick's going to spend a decent amount of time with the Firebirds, but JT Brown had a lot of really great things to say about Connor in his training camp, and I think we talked about it. I was pretty put out by some of what the Firebirds were doing in the playoffs, and I think Connor could be a stabilizing force. So what does that mean for the players who are out? And it hurts my heart, but we kind of knew this was happening. It's not focusing, but this is my guy, Ryan Donato. He goes to Chicago. So Donato, 2 years, $2 million AAV. We also lose Morgan Geekie, 2 years, $2 million. Carson Soucy, 3 years, 3.25. Morgan Geekie goes to Boston. Carson Soucy to Vancouver. So he remains in conference. 3 years, 3.25 AAV. And Daniel Sprong to Detroit, 1 year, $2 million. So overall, I think what we know is, again, from what we heard from Ronnie Francis, is that particularly looking at the Carson Soucy contract, and he was asked about this in media availability, looking at Soucy, looking at that they know they have Riker Evans coming up. We're going to talk about Dev Camp a little bit before we close out the show, but wanting to really make some space for Riker Evans and perhaps someone else that they didn't have in mind to make the roster. And so, and perhaps to get a contract extension. We also know that Will Borgen, Vince Dunn have, enacted arbitration. So we'll see what happens there. We kind of talked about this, that Seuss might be out of juice. Again, at the trade deadline, it was a conversation after, and we knew Carson Soucy, we talked about it on the show, that Carson Soucy and his family really wanted to know where they were going to be. He doesn't have to move too far, but they are expecting. So I think that's probably good there. I did like the little nugget that Ronnie Francis gave us. He didn't speak to any of the other players doing this, but he did talk about Ryan Donato personally calling, not going through his team or his agents, and saying thank you for the opportunity. And I love that. I'm not surprised by by Ryan Donato, by Donnie. I wish it could have worked out, but I do wish him the best. So we'll see what happens there. So this means that there's opportunity for some players from the Firebirds to step up. Ty Cartier was mentioned, Riker Evans mentioned, obviously Shane Wright. Now there's a little bit of a wrinkle with Shane Wright. We'll talk a little bit about that coming up in the next segment. But I think that there's still some work that we need done. We did hear from Ron Francis that he heard from Andre Burakovsky right around the draft time, and he made a little joke about getting a call, but it was all good. And he said that Burakovsky said he's feeling good, he's getting stronger day to day, and that's good. And Burakovsky made a difference on this squad. Bjorkstrand started to find his stride. And, I think we obviously know what Maddie Beniers was able to do as the eventual Calder winner. Grubauer finally getting comfortable with this squad, has to stay healthy. Joey Decord bringing in some competition at goaltending. I love that. We'll see what happens there. But, there's a few things, and we knew this. Ron Francis always kind of thinking a few steps ahead, him and the staff thinking a few steps ahead. They're already in conversations with Maddie Beniers. It's something that obviously they wanted to get through the awards and give him a little bit of rest. Didn't completely lock into a timeline, but there are talks happening. It is something that the Seattle Kraken feel that they're good with their cap. Any extension from Beniers wouldn't hit until next year. So that gives them a little bit of time to forward project. But again, with Dunn and Borgen still not locked in, we'll have to go through arbitration, see what that looks like. I think there's some good elements here. I would love to see us get a little bit more of an elite scorer. Does that mean Erik Karlsson? Again, sounds like we're out of that sweepstakes. Is there another forward that we could toss into the mix? How is Jared McCann going to bounce back? I mean, we know we saw him back, but obviously he was playing with a few different lines. Are there still more moves to make? To be determined. But we're going to close out the show talking about development camp. Some of the things that we heard. Again, I think you should check out Converge Media, who is on site, and talk to some of the Black representation, which I love. Yes, Team More Melanin. Obviously, Jessica Campbell was there. Dave Haxtell talked a little bit about that. And as far as the kind of guests, coaches, and the work that they're doing. So we'll get you ready, because in probably right around the time that we're getting ready to drop this, we'll be ready for that scrimmage, and then we'll see these guys again, the majority of them, in September. But let's talk a little bit about Shane Wright, perhaps once again having to make an exemption for him, and what he brought to development camp this year. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily routine. As promised, we're going to close out talking about development camp. The Seattle Kraken had a number of players that they were able to bring in for dev camp, and all of their picks from this year were brought in. We see that a lot of them took over the IG stories. Zachariah took over. A few other players took over IG stories. But, I think we see that all of the players that again, were drafted this year, including some players from last year's draft class. You had Ty Nelson in the mix. You had Melanson there. We had David Goyette there. Of course, you saw that the Furcus Circus was in the house. And there were also some players that did not come through our development camp or were not directly drafted by us. I mean, Ty Cartier was that player last year. But speaking of Ty Cartier and Riker Evans, who were some names noticeably out, and just take a look over on the on the Twitter page, if it's working for you, haha, wink, wink. But you can see this dev camp roster right here. But no Ty Cartier, no Riker Evans. And that was a decision, and a few other players, but those were the ones that Ron Francis talked about the most. Really wanted some of those guys to come in a la what Matty Beniers did last year. He had a little bit of time in the NHL, then coming to development camp to serve a leadership role, but also to make sure his fitness is on track. And that's what Shane Wright did this year. Both Ron Francis and Dave Haxtell just talked about the growth that they've seen from Shane Wright. Shane also talked to media for a little bit. And, I'm going to take you to what Shane Wright had to say just about being able to be with the Firebirds, coming back to development camp, and, what he hopes will be his development moving forward. Let's hear from Shane Wright for a little bit.
How's it going?
Good. How would you kind of sum up this year for you? I mean, 4 different stops, a lot of different hockey. Like, how do you kind of characterize the whole experience for you?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot. That's definitely probably the biggest thing. Definitely grew a lot as a person, as a player. Obviously, like you said, a lot of different teams, a lot of different places, and different voices from coaches and teammates and all that. But I think overall, really had some pretty cool experiences here, obviously, and just learned a lot about myself. Learned a lot about what it takes to be at the pro level and what it takes to be a good player at that level. And some ups and downs, but I think overall, really a really fun year for me. Definitely grew a lot.
Ron Francis told us here yesterday that he thought you were playing your best hockey at the end here in the series against Hershey and such. Do you kind of agree with that? That was the best you've been. Yeah,
I would agree. I think I was just playing hockey. I was having fun. I think I was looking forward to coming to the rink every day and enjoying playing in the playoffs and being in that atmosphere. Going that far and making a run like we did. That's fun hockey. You enjoy playing those games and playing in those loud buildings and having those experiences. And I was really happy with the way I was playing and try to kind of build off that at the end of the season and how I was playing there, kind of build that into this development camp and then through training camp as well.
You played a lot of games this year. I mean, you've done it in the past at the junior level. You played a pretty hefty schedule. What's the difference doing it when a lot of those games are professional games, international games? Yeah,
you really got to take care of your body. You really got to be, really keying in on nutrition and sleep and hydration. You think those are kind of cliche things to say nowadays, but you don't realize just how important those things are and how much an impact those things have on your performance. And in Coachella, we had an unbelievable team. Mike Donahue is world class. Strength conditioning, really making sure everyone's staying healthy, making sure everyone's taking care of their bodies properly, and they gave us all the resources, all the opportunities to do that. And I think just to go along with a grind of a season like that and through a long playoff run, take care of yourself is really important, and I think you definitely did a good job with that.
So that's a little bit from Shane Wright. Again, make sure you're checking out our YouTube page where we will have all of these videos uploaded. And in the next few days, we'll break down the players that were at development camp, who we heard from, the coaches that we heard from, and try to get a sense for what the masterminds, Ron Francis and company, are thinking about the 23-24 season. As I mentioned, I will be doing a little bit more NHL writing for CBS. I'm super excited about that. But let's give some stick taps to Darren Fun Guy Brown, who will take over the Seattle Kraken beat for NHL.com. Of course, the late, great Andy Ide did that work for the Seattle Kraken. And so Darren now stepping into that role. We're so happy for him. Congratulations, Darren. Look forward to featuring your work as we usually do right here on Locked On Kraken. And if you're in Seattle, I hope you enjoy the Mariners hosting the All-Star Weekend, the HBCU Swingman Classic also happening. Converge Media has been great. Bessa has been great in keeping up with all of that. Circling Seattle sports is another one. So shout out, stick taps to you all. I hope to see the Seattle Kraken beat soon in the fall. Until then, we're going to have a good time talking about the free agency moves. Ron Francis said there could be a few more, but said they're not necessarily frantically on the phone. So I think we're all but done. Basically said if he thought there was an impact player that they could pick up and that the deal makes sense, that they would do it. And they have the green light to do that. So I think we still need that player. Does it come during this offseason free agency period or sometime throughout the season? We don't know yet, but there are some players, and we mentioned Brandon Tanev in passing and the like, and we'll talk about this, really start breaking down the roster. Goaltending is going to be very competitive for the Seattle Kraken, and it needs to be because, I don't know. We're going with these three guys, but there might be a move that needs to be made to maybe bring in some fresh and young blood if we can't quite get the right mix. But anyway, we'll talk about all of that and more. Be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other, and hold fast, stay true. Let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Don't forget, over on the Seattle Kraken YouTube page, you can watch live the scrimmage. And last year, they gave us a little bit of a commentary. Nick Olczyk, I believe, was on there. So we'll see if we get that again. If you're at Kraken Community Iceplex, hope you enjoy a good time and stick around because the Seattle Kraken will treat you to a barbecue. All right, we'll catch you on the next episode. Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Kraken podcast network, free and available wherever you listen to audio podcasts and on YouTube. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.